Hello, this is Ben, and this is a technology issue. So I actually have the video ready to go, but it's too big for me to send it. So I'm going to play it.
Okay, hello, this is Benjamin Cross, and I'm doing my carbon tax speech, and I have got my folks here in the back. Yes, we're doing this in a car. Right. Okay. So carbon taxing is one of the most controversial subjects today, and it is necessary in today's world to regulate commercial enterprise and to preserve our environment. And as things increase, as population increases, as well as our energy budgets, we have to look at the short-term behaviors of a lot of companies that are not preserving the environment. And we need to hedge that in a more conservative way. And green technology has a lot of initial investment, but it pays off later and preserves our beautiful Earth. And carbon taxing guides businesses in the right direction. A little bit of history. In 1993, the Clinton administration first proposed a general tax, which is initially to decrease the national deficit, but also to promote energy conservation. And initially it was to be levied on coal and natural gases and things like that. However, a lot of these early efforts had failed, and this had to do with powerful fossil fuel companies funding campaigns against Democratic lawmakers that were trying to put this into effect. And so a lot of these efforts washed out. At this time, during 1994, this is where Al Gore really started bringing to the public the idea of climate change and introducing the carbon tax in that way, and really introducing it to the populace. And what he was trying to do is pass a climate change bill, and that would have effectively taxed carbon as well. And a lot of those efforts were not successful. In 2009, President Obama urged the House Democrats to vote for a cap and trade system, which basically requires companies to have permits when they have carbon emissions, and so it's limiting what they can do. However, at this time, the Tea Party spent millions of dollars and actually were able to unseat a lot of members who were voting for that bill. So, to begin with, there's really two major forms of carbon tax and how that is being proposed to the government. The first is just carbon tax initially, and that is taxing carbon based on each unit. So this applies to companies, and it would apply to individuals as well. And so, for an example, if you had a car that had a certain amount of emissions, you would be paying taxes on some of that. So there'd be a lot of incentive across the country to lower them. The other type is cap and trade, and this is the one Obama was focusing on. This does focus on larger firms, organizations that have a lot of carbon emissions. And the best way to understand it is that it creates a carbon ceiling, and it has permits that fall under that. And so if a company were to use up all the emissions under their permit, what they would have to do is purchase a permit from another firm. And basically that's the trade part of it. So cap being the ceiling, and trade if you use up what you have. There's a lot of hybrid ideas on combinations of cap and trade and carbon tax. And something the National Tax Journal really looks at is when you are taxing an an industry like that, and carbon tax would affect a lot of industries. You have to ask yourself, are you preventing growth while taxing these organizations? And so that's what they try to look at is when taxes are coming in, what do you do with that money so that you promote the country's GDP? So you're actually creating growth, you're creating jobs, while at the same time taxing. Now, there's carbon taxing and global change, how that is portrayed in the media is an important part of this. And Petra Brock, who's an author in a peer-reviewed journal of the Canadian Journal of Sociology, she really looks at how climate change and carbon tax is portrayed in the media. And what she found was that it varies significantly across different countries. It even varies within countries. So the United States, for instance, climate skeptics are getting a lot of attention. And this, I don't know if you can really see that, is a visual aid. It shows a graph of MSNBC. President Obama had a 49-minute climate speech, and it shows MSNBC covering only 41 seconds of it, Fox 4.5 minutes, CNN 8 minutes and 5 seconds, and the Weather Channel covering it a full 49 minutes. And so it kind of speaks to what organizations are really trying to, publish what's going on in the government to better understand what's that. And so the Weather Journal largely captures that. Another interesting tidbit in this prop is that there's a consensus gap in the understanding of what scientists are thinking with regards to climate change. And the U.S. public thinks that 55% of scientists agree that there's climate change, when in reality 97% of scientists agree on that issue. So there's quite a disparity in that perception. Another thing the Canadian Journal of Sociology really looks at is understanding the different geological, energy, and water effects of climate change. And when they're addressing carbon taxing, they do it in a slightly different way than many of our own media channels do it here in the United States. And so I think that speaks well to understanding climate change. I think that one of the most persuasive things that you can really do is to just educate people about that climate change is happening. There's a lot of record-setting droughts, a lot of climate phenomenon that hasn't been seen in hundreds of years, in some cases even 1,000 years. So, kind of speaking to what scientists do in that profession, the Montreal Protocol in 1987 was a very significant landmark in understanding humanity's impact on climate. And what this was about was the ozone layer. And scientists discovered that as things were going, by the year 2050, much of the tropical latitudes, this is equator to 15 degrees north and south, would nearly have been unlivable. And that is because UV intensity would have been so high that people virtually couldn't have gone outside. It would have fried your eyeballs. Your skin would have absolutely caused cancer very quickly. And so that entire latitude would have been very difficult to live in. And that's only by the year 2050. And so these are scientists looking at climate and seeing a real issue. And this actually motivated much of the world to make this change. And in a quick scientific sense, how it worked was a lot of industries were emitting, or in their emissions, chlorine into the air as an aerosol. And when chlorine gets into the ozone, one molecule of chlorine can break down virtually tens of thousands of O3 molecules, which is what makes up the ozone. So that's one great example of scientists in the business of climate and making the right changes. So preserving our environment is a common sense goal. And I have another prop, just kind of looking at global temperatures. It's sort of a graph. It's difficult to see, but basically it says, from the Industrial Revolution, 1850 to 1950, it shows a steady increase and a correlation between concentrations of CO2 and a temperature change of about a half a degree. And between 1950 and the year 2000, it's increasing much faster. The rate of change is quite significant. So climate change is a very real issue. And so the question is taxing the right thing as a way to correct that? And really it is. It's the right way to go. And to follow on to that, what do you do with those revenues? How do you bolster production in a country while at the same time moving companies to be conservative? And so one thing that USA Today said, carbon tax provides common ground for Republicans and Democrats to address climate change and strengthen our economy. And Ms. Lagarde, the IMF chief, she also rightly said the time is right to implement carbon regulations, and she spoke to effectively the same thing. So in conclusion, as populations and production grows, there's a lot more industry that's required to support that many people, and we need to be able to do that and have businesses modernize and move forward to be efficient and not see progress as a short-term profit, and to do so at the great expense of our environment. That's my paper. Thank you for bearing with me.